You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch UK Radio.
Evening all. How are we? You'll get the joke of that in a minute when I introduce who my guest is tonight. How is everyone? It's Wednesday, so that means it's another new episode of Haunted Histories coming at you completely and totally live tonight. Yes, I am live for the next hour. God help us all, that's all I can say. Help us all. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get through this because I haven't done a live one for a little while, so this is either going to be complete car crash radio or it's going to be really good. I'm hoping for the really good, hoping it's going to sound good. And if you have got any questions at all when I introduce my guest, please do. And you're not that far off, Richard. You're not that far off. Hello. What's going on here? Yeah, you're not that far off. You're not that far off, mate. Well done. Anyway, if you have got any questions for my guest even, please do put them in the chat room because, like I said, we're going to be live and he will be staying with us for the next hour. So what's everyone been up to? Well, you probably saw me do the live on Monday because our illustrious leader, Madame Greenaway, she's she works in retail, so the poor thing is, as all of you guys who are in retail, I feel very sorry for you. Now the silly season has started. It will be over soon, I promise. It's only a few weeks. Just keep yourselves thinking that, and then think of all the discount wine you'll get hopefully at the end of it. There's got to be a positive in there somewhere, hasn't there? Well, so you'll know that I did a secret investigation at the weekend at a former US Air Force base, of which I will not name because it's going to be talked about in my next book, hopefully coming out in the new year once I get the first draft proofed and sent over for editing. Apart from that, things are starting to slow down, really. Now it's got all the Christmas dues are coming up and juggling things and trying to get day job boring stuff finished, ready for when everything shuts down for a couple of weeks at Christmas. But that doesn't mean I'm not still bringing you cracking shows. And tonight's show is no different. Now, yes, I was kind of taking the mickey out of the police with the hello, what's going on here and evening all, because I'm talking to someone who's from the group Pigs. And that's not me being derogatory about our boys in blue, or black as they are now. It's Tim from PIGS. How you doing, Tim?
Hello. I'm very good, thank you very much.
Good.
And hello, of course, to all of the listeners out there. I know there's thousands of them. There's bound to be. But yes, I just picked up on your retail thing. You know what? I did some time in retail, and I know the pain and suffering that goes on at this time of year.
Sucks,
it's mostly apprehension when it comes to early December. Then it gets into just total carnage. But they work right through January as well, because you have the January sales and you have the kind of middle of January. Everyone's bringing stuff back. Yep. So yeah, I know all about that.
Yep, I've worked in retail and I worked in a hotel, function suite in a hotel for a while over the Christmas New Year period. That's a killer. That is a killer.
Imagine.
But it is, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger and all that, Tim.
This is apparently true, yes.
Now, I'm not being derogatory about the police by calling you lot pigs, am I?
No, and I think it's one of those things. It's a bit of a joke. The whole name was a bit of a joke years and years ago, and we weren't being derogatory either. We were just taking the mickey out of ourselves at the time, to be honest. But I think we've been quite lucky that it's quite a memorable name, and for those people that have come across the kind of I don't know, should we say modus operandi that we adopted even back in the early days, yes, they seem to enjoy it. So it's one of those things that sticks, and some people have quite an affection for it. So it's quite cool. It's worked well for us. But I know that in the past, talking to a chap around these parts, when he first discovered us, he thought it was we thought we were some kind of weird anti-police protest kind of website, which was a bit bizarre because there's nothing about it. It just talks about ghosts. But there you go.
So what does it actually stand for, the PIGS?
Well, we had to think of something, of course, to fit that. So originally it was the Paranormal Investigation Group Sussex.
Right.
Until we found that all of our stuff we were doing wasn't actually in Sussex. So we changed it a little bit to Paranormal Intelligence Gathering Service, which is kind of more in tune with the things that we do.
Yeah. And do you have to have been a warrant card carrying officer?
No, not at all. I mean, no. Originally there was 3 of us, and we were, but it's not really one of those. It's more about when we first started. That's where we were at. But as we kind of progressed through, those guys, they got families and time was short, so they're not with us any longer. I'm the only remaining person from those days. But it's more along the lines of, the most important thing, I think, is people that can smile and be human people and good with members of the public and stuff, and the side of what we do was about collecting evidence, trying to gather some kind of evidence that can be replayed in some way, a format, if you like. So that was it. And along, we had, our ghosts we used to call them suspects, because we were trying to identify who they were through historic research of the people that would have been connected to the building, trying to work out their modus operandi to see what it was that they were doing, and could we tie that into the hauntings that are going on. So it was kind of based around what we were more familiar with in those days. Yeah.
So using language that would make that you'd be able to use almost if you were talking about a case or something like that.
Yeah, I suppose we would. We still to this day we use a thing called an incident board, which is basically the things that happen go on the incident board, and then they'll be researched later on. So there's lots of those little tie-ins and connections that still are there today.
But the thing is, a lot of these techniques that you're talking about, they do work. It's not just the UK police force use, and police forces and any kind of investigation. The FBI use things like that, don't they? All of them, they all use those kind of, not memory maps, but that kind of way of remembering stuff. So it seems logical if you're doing a type of investigation. Well, an investigation is an investigation, whether you're investigating something of a more ethereal nature or investigating a serial killer. It's still an investigation.
It is exactly that. It doesn't matter, like you say, if you're investigating the loss of a packet of sugar, or like you say, something more serious. But because an investigator will have a structure, and structures and the elements that go into the structure will help you get to the end goal, which is, if you like, the discovery of further evidence, or of what caused such and such, or the person responsible, and so on. They all have methods and parts to them.
Well, just looking in the chat room, we haven't had any questions yet, but SJ's listening, because she did say earlier that another interesting show we're going to be doing tonight, because we're going to be talking about the underground hospital in Guernsey shortly. Jeanette, one of the spooky sisters, she's in the chat room, and our mutual friend Corinne is apparently listening as she works.
Hello, do you know what? Can I just quickly say to Corinne?
Of course you can.
I had a gentleman come to our event at Mitchelham Priory, and he passed on the hello from Corinne. So I'm returning the hello back again.
I'm sure she's just put something about that when her mother came into Germany after the war, the German language was different. There was High German and Low German, and her mum had to translate for her grandparents. I think you have actually told me that fact before, Corinne, because I know you said your mum was from Sudetenland, which was like the German quarter of Czechoslovakia. And she's just put Andrew, and then she said, I said Tim was lush.
It was Andrew, although he didn't pass on that bit of information.
Okay. All right. Have a word with him, Corinne. He didn't pass the whole sort of the message on. So, did you do investigating when you were still in the service, or was it Did you do it more once you'd left?
It was. We mean the ghost stuff. It was. It was once we had left.
Right.
We got into this thing because when I left, I was working for a retailer, and I was tasked with doing team building. And because it was close to Halloween, I thought, let's do a ghost hunt, and that could be a team build. So we worked on this format, if you like. Got this team build to happen. It was like a ghost hunt around Pevensey Castle, but it was so successful that we ended up doing it so many times for all sorts of people and companies and what have you. And I said to a couple of my friends that were ex-police officers, I said, you've got to come to one of these team builds. They're good fun. No one's going to say, who are you, sort of thing. Come along. So they did, and then we kind of had a lot of fun. And the following week we went and did somewhere else, and investigated somewhere else. And we kept on doing this on a Friday, and finding ourselves in the pub. And I wonder if
how did that happen?
Well, exactly. I wonder if the attraction was actually the ghost hunt or the pub. I'm still to this day not sure.
Potato.
Exactly. I mean, I think it came down to it. And from one of the discussions that we were having, because, we were aware as well, certainly a little while after doing the initial team builds, that there was paranormal societies and stuff that were out there doing stuff, and we were interested in what they were doing and laughing a little bit about how we ended up doing this stuff, and perhaps we should have a name like these guys have as well, because they all seem to have these kind of names which were like initials and all stood for something. And of course then we went on to see how ridiculous we could get about it, call ourselves saps and knobs and all sorts of stuff. And someone said pigs, and of course that stuck, and then we just had to find some words to fit it, and that's kind of how it accidentally got called that.
I think it's brilliant that you're taking the mickey out of yourselves. I think I love that. I think it's great. I must admit, when I first encountered your name, it must have been about 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, they can't be. Oh my God, how cool. How cool was that? So yeah. I quite liked it when Corinne said, you've got to speak to my mate Tim from Pigs. He's the one to speak to. And I was like, it's just sort of serendipity, isn't it? Because I just thought the name was great. I did think it was absolutely great. So you do private investigations as well as the public work?
Yeah, I mean, to me, yes. If something interesting enough comes along, then certainly I'd be keen to look at it. But to be honest, after many years of being contacted about private stuff, it generally, if I'm honest, I'll listen to what it is, but generally I'll just push them on to someone else, because I don't really have time for that sort of stuff. Right. And I know it sounds terrible, it sounds a bit awful and negative, but I don't mean it to be. It's more that lots of these things are always environmentally something going on in terms of an environmental thing, but the trouble is no one wants to hear that. They don't want you to tell them that is nothing but dust, or that is your pipes, or that is something else. They don't want rational. Most of the time they get quite a little bit annoyed when you say, I'm sorry, but I think this is such and such. So I tend to now just avoid them a little bit, unless it's quite compelling and an interesting case to look at.
Unless it's a pub that will give you free beer.
Well, that would be an instant down there. I'll be there next weekend. Yeah, no trouble.
Because you're based down on the south coast,
in Eastbourne, in along the south coast.
So you've got sort of Hastings nearby, Brighton, all those brilliant places. Yeah. Now, the reason I got in touch with you was because I was interested in doing a show on sort of to link in with the German occupation of the Channel Islands. It was Corinne who I sort of said, does anyone know anyone who knows anything about Guernsey and investigating it? And she said, Tim from Pigs, he's the one, drop him a line. So I did. And you guys have been investigating the underground hospital in Guernsey, haven't you?
Yes.
How many visits have you done there now?
We've done 3 visits of 2 nights, so it's 6 nights there.
Right.
This year, yeah.
Right, and you've got some more coming up in 2020 as well, haven't you?
We're back again in 2020 with a further 2 weekends. Mm-hmm. But we're also doing another location in Guernsey as well for 2 weekends.
I'm going to come on to that one in a minute. I'm going to come on to that one. Yes, I've written a note down for that one as well, so don't worry, I'm going to come on to that one. So, why Guernsey and why the hospital?
Well, when we first started doing events as such, we were adopted quite quickly by a charity called the Anti-Nolan Trust, and they did events, charity events, and we would host those for them. And they did some in the Channel Islands. They did the Jersey castles, the Gorey and Elizabeth, and in Guernsey we did a place called Myris. And when we went to Guernsey, everybody said on the island, "Oh, you've got to do the underground hospital," because it's so terrifying and stuff. But in those days, it was under ownership, and it was something that was very much frowned upon and not permitted to take place. So we never ever had the opportunity to do that. However, as time went on and as it pans out, the people that restore the bunkers and they look after all the historic German-built stuff over there, a brilliant organisation called Festung Guernsey, and I tell you what, they put so much work and effort into preserving the heritage, if you like, of the island. They were working. We were aware of them through the charity things that we did, and we'd met a guy called Paul. And when they now maintain and look after the underground hospital, and so funds for these locations is such a vital thing. Yeah. And so it was great because it works out well for both of us. We get to do this amazing location that has such a reputation for being haunted, and at the same time, we can raise, or through the hiring of the venue, we can get them some good funds to help them with their restorations and preserving it. Because without that, these things wouldn't be there within 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just as a sort of, obviously this is called Haunted Histories, so I'm going to do a bit of history now. Okay. And I'm sure you know all of this, Tim, so please forgive me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs.
No, it's cool.
One of the things I put was on Facebook today, and I think it was SJ actually. I said it's been a bit embarrassing being British, discovering some of the things I've discovered about the Channel Islands, and I did kind of know some of it in the back of my mind, but I'm sure you can imagine when I'm doing a different subject every single week, some of these facts do get shoved to the back of my mind until something prompts them to come back forward. And I know that in sort of 1940, the British basically said, "Nah, we're not going to worry about protecting the Channel Islands. It's not that important." After we got sort of pushed out of France, after Dunkirk, it's not that important. We don't need to protect them. We'll demilitarize them and not try and protect them. But what we actually did was we didn't tell the Germans this. We made sure they didn't find out, so they still thought there was a military presence from the Allies on the Channel Islands. But basically we left them as sitting ducks because it was the closest that the Germans got to the UK shores by eventually invading the Channel Islands. And there was one story that I was reading, which actually it's kind of funny, but it's not, because people did actually die. But I think it was on the 28th of June 1940, and the Germans apparently had been doing sort of aerial recce's over the islands, and this was actually on Guernsey, I think St Peter Port, Guernsey, isn't it? Yes. And it was actually on Guernsey, and there was all these lorries lined up on the docks. I think they were full of, they were getting ready to go to the UK, and the Germans thought they were troop carriers, and so bombed them. They had tomatoes on.
Ah, yes.
But they still managed to kill people by doing it, which is why it's not as funny as it sounds. But yes, they bombed these troop carriers, and they probably saw loads of red stuff shooting up in the air and thought they'd got all these soldiers. No, they just created a lot of tomato sauce by doing it. But and that is quite an amusing story because of the fact they didn't know that it had been kept secret, that there were no UK British troops on the island. But what it did mean is that it left all the islanders on all four islands, so Guernsey, Alderney, Sark and Jersey, massively vulnerable to the German war machine, which didn't take long to appear once they realised that the islands had been demilitarised.
I mean, I think, to be honest, not knowing a particular amount of history, you'll have to forgive me, but my
that's right.
my
That's
mind,
that's my
that's
thing.
your
yeah,
bit.
That's my
but
bit,
my mind fills this. It fills the blanks in a little bit in my own mental state, and that says, we probably wouldn't have been able to defend it anyway. I mean, if France can't stand up against an oncoming Germany, then what chance did we have on some islands when we were all of our resources went to the mainland? We were even cutting off people's railings and stuff for the metal, so we haven't got a chance to do much on the Channel Islands. But I think what we did do was ensure that we didn't create any conflict either.
Yeah, I'd have to disagree with you there, Tim. Respectfully disagree, because we protected Malta because we saw it had strategic importance to Italy and sort of North Africa as a port and everything else. And one of the things is that they decided. I mean, it's a bit like with a lot of things. There was only a certain budget. There wasn't money to burn, and it was like, well, do we protect this or do we protect this, or which one? It's about when you've got to decide what to spend your money on, but we did protect Malta, and Malta is not a big island at all, and we did send a lot of aid to Malta, especially when they were under their 3-week siege that they had, when they all sort of were disappearing underground to try and protect themselves. So I don't know about whether it was the size of the island was the issue. I think it was literally we've got resources, but we have to decide what to use them for.
But didn't we already have a naval base in Malta?
We actually had bases in the Channel Islands as well.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I wasn't aware of those, but
yeah.
So
okay. I think it was just a case of resources. Actually, what Corinne says as she said she heard the thing of railings cut down for the war effort. It was actually it wasn't. They weren't asked to be cut down. And she's right. Actually, a lot of the metal was scrapped that they cut down. The metal they wanted was to make aeroplanes and bomb casings and everything else. So they asked for metal, and everyone was being so to do with the war effort. They'd give all their saucepans and all that kind of thing. And then some bright spark saw the iron in railings and thought, well, that'll do, and gave that, but it was the wrong type of metal. So there's all these funny stories that when you start looking into it, best intentions and all that, but it was just people getting carried away. I suppose it's I don't know. I suppose it's almost like recycling now. People think everything can be recycled and it can't, so they think they're doing a good thing, but they're actually creating more work for the people at the other end because they have to chuck things out because they can't be recycled if they hadn't been put in the bag in the first place. But it's still trying to do the right thing. But I think with the Channel Islands, they were determined that they were of no strategic importance. So, whereas Hitler did think they were important, and he included them in the building of the Atlantic Wall.
He did, indeed. In fact, there is some conspiracy around it, and I don't know how much of it is true because I'm not a great researcher in this respect, but the amount of fortifications that are on the Channel Islands, particularly Guernsey, would make you wonder why there was so much effort being put into protecting these small islands from the British, or from the Allies, if you like, because it's a crazy amount of concrete, they poured into Guernsey. And there was, the conspiracy of why? What was that for?
Who knows? I mean, I visited parts of the Atlantic Wall in Normandy, and one of the sort of the main centres that's I can't remember which of the beaches it's next to. I want to say Sword, but I might be wrong. And they are pretty amazing, and like you say, there's massive amounts of concrete, and I wondered that when I see the amount of fortifications that were put on. What were they trying to stop? But then again, they probably thought, well, France is ours, this is a good barrier against it for the Allies, let's but they had got them on the French coast because it did go along the Normandy coast as well. But who knows? There's a brilliant story on the island of Sark. There was a lady that lived there. I think she had the only house on the island at the time, and it was like a guest house. And when some senior Nazi people turned up to the island, to this house, she made them sign the guest book. I like that.
She did. Like that. And the guest book today, you can see the guest book. It's either on. I haven't seen it myself. It's on show over there. It's in one of the museums in Guernsey, but it's signed by these generals, these Nazi generals.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I do like what Corinne's just put. She said that her late father said Germany may have lost the war, but their women married Englishmen to make their lives a misery. Was he joking, really? Was he joking, really, Corinne? Because I actually found stories the opposite. Now, this was we'll talk a bit more about the occupation of Guernsey, because it's absolutely fascinating. What I read was a lot of first-hand accounts of what it was like, and most of them are actually quite positive. They're sort of saying that actually the Germans were quite nice. They weren't. A few of them were a bit scary, and you did used to hide a bit if you were out after curfew, because you did see people get beaten up because they'd broken curfew. So it was strict, but there was these children sort of saying that a lot of the soldiers were really nice to the kids because they had children of their own at home and who they were missing. And it is a kind of not all of these, well, they were Nazis, were your Reinhardts and various other sort of well-known.
I mean, I think the islands, they got on with their lives. They got on with their lives under the regime of what it was that they were doing, because they had to, and and that was it. And I think there was obviously not resistance in terms of thing, but there was like should we say? I get the feeling there was like almost like a calculated cooperation that went on, but not for the benefit of being supporters of the regime or anything, but they they really had no choice, and they got on with their lives, and as a result, the occupying Nazi forces, like you say, there was some pretty awful things that happened, but overall it just functioned under this regime.
Now, I did read some of the changes that the Nazis made to the Channel Islands when they moved in. They changed the times so that the times matched German time. So the clocks are changed to match German time. They changed the side of the road that they drove on. So they had to drive on the right as opposed to the left. No more than 3 people were allowed to be together at any one time. Cameras, radios, all that kind of thing were all confiscated. Even houses were confiscated. There was a story of a farmer, I was reading, it was a first-hand account by his son, of the Germans came, this was on Guernsey, and said they wanted the farmhouse as their quarters, and so made the family move out into the stables nearby.
Yeah. There's quite a few of those little stories. I was talking to a chap on one of the events, and he was saying that his house he was just doing some refurbishment, and in his house, the occupying Nazi officers who had his house had carved into the floorboards something about floorboards make good firewood or something, because in those days, of course, they did occupy a lot of the houses, and of course, as they ran out of resources, they started to burn things like floorboards and all the rest of it, and any wood they could find inside these houses. Yeah.
But there weren't that many kids, well, especially in Guernsey. They'd evacuated about 4/5 of the children before the Germans did invade in the end of June of 1940. But the other thing that was interesting, there was restrictions of medicine. They started restricting the access to medicines for the people of Guernsey, which makes it interesting in the fact that we're going to be talking about a hospital that they built. Now, it was winter 1940 that they started constructing the underground hospital on Guernsey, and it was by a group called, I don't know how you pronounce them, TOD or TOT organisation.
Yeah, TOD, I think.
Yeah, they were part of the engineering firm who did all of that stuff. I think they did the wall, they did a lot of the underground hospitals, bunkers, all that kind of thing. And their preferred, shall we say, source of labour was prisoners and slave labour. And they imported a load of prisoners, German prisoners, who were French, Spanish, Moroccan, Algerian, Belgian, Dutch, Polish. Well, it says Russian, but it was more Ukrainians than anything. And they also wanted to use prisoners they'd captured in Guernsey to do this building work. Now, this building work, there's a lot of stories about how dangerous it was. In one explosion, when they were trying to obviously blow out the rock to start building these amazing tunnels in the I suppose the hill, for want of a better term, 17 workers were killed in one explosion.
Yeah. I think the conditions for these prisoners of war, this forced labour, as it's known, was pretty horrendous. In terms of their treatment, their food supply was dire, and it was almost probably hell on earth for these people.
Yeah.
And they were forced to build these constructions, these bunkers and fortifications and this hospital.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it sort of it makes some of the nicer stories I've read. I mean, one of the more amusing stories I read about the occupation was that a lot of the girls, the young women, were falling in love with German soldiers because at the time they were there in the summer, the Germans apparently were whipping off their clothes and sunbathing, and a lot of the Channel Islanders had never seen people stripping down to literally their pants to sunbathe.
Right.
And I mean, it makes you think of all the Germans I've ever seen on holiday as well. They still do it, and but they were saying that they were all sort of good looking and fair haired and muscular and tanned, and a lot of the girls were sort of
fed. Yeah,
and fed, yeah.
And fed, yeah.
There was an awful lot of reports of German babies being born, shall we say.
I think, I mean, they used to call them, what do they call it, Nazi bags or something like that.
Yeah,
it was the phrase used for a lady or a girl that had a relationship with a Nazi,
Yeah. And in fact, one story I met, there was a couple, they met, he was the soldier, she was... as he put it, a cheeky islander, and they actually were together for the rest of their lives and had 5 children. But because she was married to a German, she wasn't allowed to return to Guernsey because the Guernsey government wouldn't let anyone who was associated with the Germans return after the war, which I think is quite sad, really, because he was just doing his job. At the end of the day, he wasn't like he was he wasn't running one of the camps, of which there were camps in the Channel Islands. There was 2 in Alderney called, and I've got these written down, where are they? I think it's Silt and Norderney, and those were the 2 sort of concentration camps for that area, and they were on Alderney, which is classed as part of the bailiwick of Guernsey.
That's right. They used to keep all the prisoners on those islands and then ship them over for labour, as far as I understand it, onto the Guernsey island and stuff. Yeah.
And it was actually when Roquefort killed 6 French prisoners of war, that the Guernsey prisoners actually refused to work, and they had to ship them off elsewhere because they refused to carry on working on this hospital. So the hospital gets built. It covers around 7,000 square metres. I'm not lucky enough to have been there, but I was watching the videos that you can watch of people sort of walking around it on YouTube. Does it ever look light, if that makes sense? Because to me,
No.
It looks very dark and dingy, and I mean, would they have painted the walls when it was a hospital? Do you know?
It would have been completely, obviously, there's no natural light whatsoever down there. It's a mile and a half of tunnels, rooms and whatever, corridors. And there is some evidence that, the operating theatre, for example, has radiators in it. So there would have been heating, there would have been air control.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's quite wet down there, but in the day that would probably have been controlled. There is evidence that things were painted. Not necessarily as you walk through the tunnels and stuff, so I don't know about those, but certainly the pipework is painted.
Right.
Some of it's black, and so therefore, and in the operating theatre, that's got like a whitewash on it. So I can assume that it would have been, a bit more decorated than you see it today.
Okay, it did actually have a room that was I've seen the blueprints, and there was a room that was dedicated to central heating and air conditioning generator.
Yes, there would have been, because they were obviously Germans and their engineering.
Yes.
It's like
pretty amazing.
All of their fortifications have some kind of mind-blowing air circulation system to it.
Yeah, I know that the like the Atlantic Wall headquarters in Normandy that I went into, some of the engineering in there, for having been done in the late 30s, early 40s, is quite mind-blowing. The
Absolutely.
concept of how clever it is. So anyway, so they've got this hospital. It's not little. I mean, it was designed to accommodate 500 patients, but they actually sort of worked out they could actually quite easily cope with 3 to 4 times that if they needed to. But interesting, I mean, it had a dispensary, it had 8 wards, it had an operating theatre, it had a kitchen, it had a cinema, it had a mortuary. But for most of its life, it was actually used as an ammo.
Well, strangely enough, the hospital itself is one side of it, and then fortunately for the hospital, I don't know why this is a medical thing, but it has a massive ammunition store, which is almost the size of the hospital, which is on the other side of it. And I suppose the only thing I can think of for that is that, they put your ammunition store next to a hospital because it's less likely to be a bomb target. Or
yeah, and it's underground, so it's sheltered and all
Absolutely.
of that. Yeah, so. When we'll talk about when it started being used, really, in a minute. But tell me about some of your experiences when you've been down there and experiences other people have had.
I think there's a couple of things to think about, and that is the reputation of the building. Firstly, so it has a reputation from the ghost stories that people have said, and they talk about tall shadow figures. The various apparitions that have taken place, and these things, they happen regularly. I mean, in the season we were there last year, there was times when tourists that had nothing to do with our ghost hunts would come out of the place white as sheets and tell the person in the shop and on the exit, say, "There's a lady down there, or there's a gentleman, or I've just heard her screaming," and all those things are happening all the time in this location. So it's got current ghost stories attached to it and a massive reputation. However, it is also a maze of dark tunnels where sound will travel from one end to the other. You're never really sure where sound comes from. You can walk along this place, and at some point the sound from your feet sound like they're coming towards you because of the acoustics and the way that works. So lots of the phenomena can be a natural thing. However, it does have an amazing history, and it totally, the stories that people have said about this place is way beyond, it could have been a trick of the sound or trick of the light and all the rest of it. When they're talking about, German dressed officers, German dressed soldiers appearing, hearing voices, which are, when no one is there next to them in close proximity, footsteps, and all of these sort of things come together. There's definitely an activity, should we say, that goes on in that place. But at the same time, I can totally understand why people get freaked out by it because of the very nature of obviously what it is. What it's used for, who it was built by, and of course once you're inside it, the very nature of its environment as well.
Yeah. So some of the experiences people have had, how much of it do you think is down to them almost visualising something that they think should be happening? How much of it is them, if you go into somewhere that you're told it was an asylum, people always say, oh yeah, it's really haunted and everything, and yet it might be more that you're expecting it to be because it's got that kind of scary sort of persona about it.
I think certainly there's going to be a percentage of that. Certainly there is, but I wouldn't want to discount people's experiences because I personally haven't been lucky enough to experience that this year. However, I know that people have experienced that, and when they're talking about visually seeing something, it's very hard to discount that. Because they visually saw something. They visually saw the lady, or they visually saw a man, or whatever it was that they saw, and so therefore you couldn't really say, well, it's a trick of the light because it has lighting down there, and the lighting is perfectly good, and so therefore I would err on the side of saying, well, I believe you. I believe you that this happened and this is what you saw. But if it's things like I heard a scream coming from the bottom of the area, which is okay, that could be anything, and it could have come from anywhere. But when the area is empty and no one's there apart from you, and you still hear the scream, you start going, well, what could that possibly be? I mean, it has an escape hatch, but it comes out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of fields and stuff.
Okay. Oh, I'm not disputing. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, sort of saying, because I do experience it when people tend to go into a place and they already have a preconceived conception as to what they're gonna experience because of the history. Even if they don't know the history to say the level I would, they sort of assume they're going to hear guns in a fort or a battery of some description. They assume they're going to hear screaming in a former hospital because obviously people screamed as they died and all of that. What about sort of experiments and things that you do there to sort of show the members of the public, or to sort of make it more than just say, your average
vigil? Yeah. Well, I mean, we've done a series of experiments, and we were lucky enough to have the good Dr. Kieran O'Keefe with us as well for one of our weekends that were there.
Oh, we love Kieran.
He's brilliant. And we do a series of traditional stuff as well as the more modern stuff. So we were operating the ITC stuff here. We've got an actual Frank's box, which had some really fascinating results. I'll come to those in a moment. Okay. We were doing obviously thermal imaging and using the SLS, the Stickman camera. Yeah, that was interesting, but when you have so many walls and stuff, and these things can give off false positives. Yeah. Possibly just that. We did a seance using various trigger stuff, like REM pods and that sort of stuff, which was quite an interesting phenomena as well on one of the weekends, not all of them. And of course, infrared video and infrared CCTV and various untold audio recordings and stuff. So we did lots and lots of stuff. And I would say that we had some interesting stuff. We didn't capture any ghosts on video, which is a bit of a blow because I really want to do that. But
there's always time, Tim. There is always time.
There is always time. But one of the fascinating things, doing one of the Frank's Box sessions in there, you pick up on various things. And what was interesting about this particular session is that we were talking. It was very clear that we were talking to someone who was responding, within a few seconds of the question. Yeah. And one of the guests said, who is your leader? We got through that. Are you a man or a woman, and all that sort of stuff. And he said, who is your leader? And it's clear as day. It comes Hitler. And it was like, whoa. And then that conversation progressed into was you stationed here? Was you military? Were you a man? How old are you? And the whole thing rattled on. And it was so amazing because it was consistent voice. It was always answered within about 5 seconds of the question being asked, no matter where the frequency was on the Frank's box. And it was just one of those sessions that blows you away. But then saying that, we did 4 of these sessions per night, and we did 6 nights, and that's the one session that sticks in my mind as just mind blowing.
Have you ever tried taking sort of medical supplies in there?
No. What do you mean by medical supplies? Like
bandages and things.
No,
like
we
that.
Didn't actually. We could do that. As a
Have you got
trigger.
Anyone who can speak German?
There is people. No, we don't actually. On the island, in the team, we had people come that could speak German. Obviously, we have Audrey, which is a French lady. She speaks fluent French, which is just as well because she comes from there.
Always good to speak your mother tongue.
Indeed. So she did some French speaking, which gave some kind of interesting results and stuff. But no, I mean German. The thing is, though, what we find through the EVP results is not necessarily German people or German soldiers or whoever responding, apart from obviously the Frank's box, but mostly we've come across Eastern European accents. Which,
sense.
When we go through the EVP responses, the odd kind of phrase or word that gets said is always sounding Eastern European, like a Polish kind of accent.
That makes a lot of sense because I think that the research I looked at, it said the larger number of the workers who worked on it were Polish or Ukrainian.
Yeah, and I don't know about the medical staff that would have been there. Whether they would have been German people.
German. In the majority, the doctors definitely, according to the stuff I was reading on it, the doctors would have been German doctors. The orderlies would have been German. The nurses in the main were German as well, in the main. But definitely the doctors were German. Okay.
Because I wonder, the reason I say that is simply because of a couple of the entities that we did seem to come across. The nurses that were apparently connected to weren't German; they were French.
They could have been if they were part of the Vichy Republic, because it was the Vichy Republic that basically sort of sided with Hitler to try and stop him, because he'd basically said to them, if you side with me, I won't try and take over France. So they sided with him, and he sort of still did it, and they were kind of like a puppet government. Yeah. So that is plausible that some of them could have come across, but in the main they would have wanted to use German staff, because they would have been treating German soldiers.
Yes, of course.
In that respect, but the fact that you get Eastern European come through, that makes a lot of sense with the history that I'd read, that the proliferation of prisoners used were Polish and Ukrainian, according to the historical reports and research that I'd actually done. And there is actually, if anyone's interested, I haven't got around to watching it yet because I ran out of time, but if you go onto the Cambridge University's YouTube channel, they've actually got a video all about the occupation of Guernsey called Forgotten Heroes that you can watch, which is actually on my to-do list to watch at some point, because it is fascinating. But it does make sense, and the reason I was suggesting bandages or someone who could speak German is to have the bandages there and have someone shout out in German, "We need more bandages," and see what happens, see if that galvanises and someone's looking through the bandages, just reenacting little scenes to see what works as a trigger.
You know what, I love that. I will certainly. That's so easy to do. We can do that. We'll certainly have a go. I mean, we've got a first aid kit which is totally stocked with that sort of stuff anyway. So we could certainly put that.
Quite easy to replicate. That's the sort of triggers I like to do. If I'm honest, Tim, I like to do ones that are actually quite easy, that you don't have to spend loads of money on. Corinne's just said she can swear in German. Why does that not surprise me, girl? Why does that not surprise me that she can swear in German? Get your mum to tell us how to say "we need more bandages" in German, please. But that's the kind of triggers I like to do. I don't think. I mean, all the equipment is fab. I mean, I love a spirit box, and especially when, like you were getting with your Frank's box, like you're getting direct answers to your questions. I had it on Saturday at the airfield I was at. Freaked my husband out something chronic when he was getting direct answers to his questions. It was brilliant. But sometimes just doing quite sort of almost innocuous type experiments with very sort of everyday things is going to trigger a reaction, which is brilliant.
Part of the study that we do, I mean, it's not just the event that we do, it does continue onto a study, because everything we do is recorded in some way, and I go through every single part of all of that data in the coming week. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks to get through it all. But one of the things that we do, people... One of the fascinating things is that people pick up on information. They've got no idea where it came from, but they come up with information. And of course, how can we use this information? Well, what we do is we get this written down, and this is where our incident board comes into play. We get this written down, and it goes onto an incident board. So we have, names associated with this, say the operating theatre part of the complex. Is we've come across several. I haven't got it in front of me, but we've come across several names on one of the events, and then we keep all that information. And then the next event, we keep all that information. And so over time, we amass a great deal of this data. Yeah. And then we go through looking for consistencies. So an example would be that we could go next year and say, let's look at the theatre, the operating theatre. Okay, well, look, we've got consistency on the name, Florence, for example, and James and Jeremy have come up 5 times last year. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's something in that. And therefore, you can then start to become a bit more targeted about what it is you're looking for, and who are James, Florence, and Jeremy, and start looking for this sort of thing. And I find it's a really fascinating way of trying to get that little extra bit of information out. That you can't say where it came from because you don't know, but it's someone that has no idea about being psychic and certainly hasn't studied the history. One of your guests, for example, would say, I don't know why I've got this name come to mind, Alice. Alice is, we all want to go, well, who the is Alice? But it's
who the blazes is Alice, everyone? Yeah.
But that's where it can come into really being quite a fascinating thing if you keep hold of that data and amass it over a period of time. Yeah, that's kind of what I do a lot of the time. I get given the name and then see if I can also link it in with the place, see if there's any sort of plausible reason. So the hospital itself, it only saw use as a hospital for an incredibly short time. It was literally like 2 months, I believe, and that was following D-Day. And a lot of the wounded Germans
after D-Day were shipped over to Guernsey, and I think Jersey as well, rather than taking them slightly inland in France, because obviously the Allied forces were marching their way in. They pulled them the other way and pulled them onto the Channel Islands. And this was something I thought of when I first started looking at pictures of it as a hospital, thinking there's such a thing as vitamin D, which is quite important when you're having to heal. And I think they realised after about 2 or 3 weeks of having all these wounded soldiers underground with no natural light, no natural ventilation, anything like that, it was probably actually doing them more harm than good.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't the best sort of health fitness centre you could have wished for, maybe. But I mean, obviously they had plans way beyond when they finished using it for its use.
Yeah.
When it was built and the planning of it and the architecture, etc., and the very scale of it would have suggested that it's a massive complex. It's huge, and so and again you could say, why do you need something that big on an island like Guernsey? But they had plans for this way beyond. Of course, they didn't plan for the Allies to finally put an end to their occupations. That's for sure. And this was being built for future use. And so it was. Yeah, I think like anything, it would have probably evolved over time. And now we understand about vitamin D and all the rest of it. Probably wasn't such a thing back in those days. It was more about protection from believing that we were going to bomb it and stuff.
I think they'd started looking at fresh air for helping with TB back then. But yeah, maybe they didn't know actually what the importance of vitamin D. No, they must have done, because I think they must have done. They just didn't think it. They knew. I'm trying to think of my medical history knowledge. I'm sure they did, or they just didn't think about it. And that was the last thing they thought about when they just thought about rescuing people and having them safely underground. But I do believe Hitler had something like 1,000-year plan for the Reich. So he wouldn't have expected the Allies
he probably planned to live those 1,000 years as well, I'd imagine.
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if he was doing cloning research back in the 1930s and 40s. I mean, let's face it, the arrogance of the man, it really, nothing would surprise me. So, have you ever been frightened down there?
You know what? It's a pretty harrowing place. And I certainly was for the first few times, because you could easily get lost in there as well. I got lost for the first couple of nights, but you're not sure, because there is so many dark corridors and dark rooms and all that, and it has such a reputation. Like I said, you're not sure, and I certainly did get the impression a couple of times that I wasn't necessarily on my own, and it was it was a little bit concerning. It wasn't terrifying for me, because you've been when you do ghost stuff for as long as this stuff, you may be a little bit more hardened to it, but it was certainly quite a harrowing experience, more so at the beginning, because I wasn't used to the location as I am now.
Yeah.
But it certainly wouldn't be my first choice place to go and have a walk around on my own. Let's put it that way. No. It certainly has a thing going on in it. Yeah.
The challenge is on for me then. If I can walk around it on my own.
yeah. With a small torch.
With a small torch. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. I'll go in my nurse's outfit, see what happens.
Oh yeah.
So you're back there in April.
Indeed,
I know people can see the dates are on the Pigs website and the Pigs Facebook page and everything else. Now, just to be sort of, you don't cut in the price you're quoting. That doesn't cover your travel or any accommodation. It covers the investigation and the investigation alone. Is that correct? That is correct. Yes, it is for the ghost hunt, if you like, and so obviously for us it's an extremely costly one to do, but it is an amazing location, something which the likes of which is probably uncomparable to most of this type of event. Okay, but that's not. Actually, no. I'll rewind a bit. But if people do want to sort of help in how's best to get there, where can we stay? Are you able to sort of give them guidance? Yeah, absolutely. We stay in a great hotel. It's not very far from it. It's the I can never pronounce the place. But if people were interested, drop me a line and I'll send you a link to it. It's a great hotel for people coming from the mainland or from Jersey. And again, flying over is so easy. It's 40 minutes flight from Gatwick.
45 minutes maybe, but even shorter if you're going from Southampton. And I know that the flights aren't particularly expensive. No. From Gatwick, I think they're about 80 quid or something like that.
But you're in puddle jumpers, aren't you? Don't you fly over in puddle jumpers?
It's right. Well, you do. I mean, it's so the time you've taken off, you're starting to land again.
Yeah.
But Guernsey is such a beautiful place to go,
yeah.
And I would so say, look, don't come over. Don't make it just about the ghost hunt. Come to the ghost hunt as well. That's the thing. But make sure you've got time to go and visit the amazing beaches. Go and visit the Occupation Museum because it's absolutely fascinating.
It does look interesting. I was researching that. I was looking up that as well when I was doing my research for tonight. But that's not the only thing you're going to be investigating in Guernsey going forwards, is it?
No, we were so privileged to be able to do one of the Myris batteries as well this coming year. Of course, we started our journey in Guernsey with Myris battery number 4, and what an amazing place in terms of, again, it's completely different to the sort of investigations that we'd always done before, which is castles and old manor houses and stuff. But this is a Nazi forced labour built battery, and it's all underground, it's all like corridors and just grimness. It's just awful place. And of course we have access to one of the Myris batteries that has never been investigated.
Because there's 4 of them, isn't there? There's 4 Myris batteries.
From what I understand, one of them is on the grounds of a school and there's only half of it accessible. The other one is a Battletech number 4, which is the one we did previously, which is used for kind of Battletech war games and stuff. But as a result of that, it's not in the greatest of conditions, and some of it's flooded these days. The other one is inaccessible, and I think it's just been filled in, and which leaves this one. And the one we're going to, number 1, I believe it is in just amazing condition. I'm not saying it's in pristine condition, but it's not. It's wrecked, but in comparison to the others, it's got pictures on the walls. It's got, it's in good condition in terms of it's not collapsing or anything. And again, the Festung guys have had it now for a couple of years, and they've done some amazing work to save it so far and bring it to a standard where we can conduct one of these events in there for the public to come.
Sounds like you're going to have to come back on the show next year then to talk about it.
Oh, I'd love to, and maybe bring some evidence with me as well.
That would be amazing. I did read when I was actually researching for tonight that some of the guns they used at the batteries they actually stole. The Germans stole them.
They were originally
or commandeered them, shall we say?
Yeah, they were originally
it was a Finnish ship or something, wasn't it? It was a Finnish ship had them.
Yeah, a Finnish ship was bringing them. They originally came from a Russian battleship in World War One. When they got captured, the Finnish Navy had these guns on board, and they were transporting them somewhere else. But when Finland then fell to the Nazis, then they fell into German hands, and it was these gun batteries from, I think it was originally Nina. One of the ships was called Nina or something like that. Yeah. But yeah, it's an amazing. I tell you, and there's a story. I need to tell you this story, which is a fascinating thing. German engineering and all that. These guns. One of the Myris batteries had one of these guns mounted on it, and of course these were warship guns, and it was mounted on a concrete thing, this huge battery. And when they first did the test firing, it ripped off of its anchorage and killed a lot of people. Because when you fire one of these guns on a ship, of course the ship can rock, to absorb the But when it's just concreted into a battery, of course it had nowhere to go, so it just ripped off of its mountings and caused a big problem. So that delayed their project by a considerable amount of time when they had to re-engineer the gun mounts and stuff to have these, because they'd also reboard these guns to be a higher caliber as well. I mean, the range was like 52 miles or something on these guns, but they was totally not accurate in terms of what they're going to hit, but they could certainly fire a long distance.
No, I only did a little bit of reading on it because it linked me into the Myris batteries, and I thought I'll have a quick look at them because I could see you guys were investigating them. Now, a lot of the investigations you seem to do are on the south coast, and there's one that I think is fascinating, and I think one you're doing actually on Saturday night, Anne of Cleves.
Yes, indeed.
Now poor Anne. I know she wasn't beheaded. I know she kind of got off lightly, but the fact that he divorced her because she was so ugly, I do feel a bit sorry for her.
Well, to the extent that, yeah, I mean, she didn't do too badly out of it. Let's put it that way. She certainly had lots of divorce settlement in terms of properties. Now, whether Anne ever visited this house or not is another thing, but certainly it was her house, and it's got an amazing history. If you're really into history, of course, all these locations have a really rich history of different kinds.
Did you ask me if I'm into history?
Yeah, I shouldn't.
Really?
But I mean, it's a total. I think this is where it's so new. This is what's so cool about this thing. Is, if you are into history, you have, of course, the amazing history for the Anna Cleves house, which is all sort of very old history, and it goes back to. Well, goodness knows the French people turning up on our shores, but it's also because then you have the things like the wartime history, which is equally as fascinating, but a lot more closer in time, like the Nazis and all that sort of stuff. So, and every place has an amazing history, because doing this kind of investigation or being within this industry or so, we're so fortunate to have access to these buildings and get to learn things about them that generally people would never come across unless they were doing some kind of deep study. Yep.
Why do you think I do what I do?
Oh no, it's absolutely. Well, I think it's one of those things. If you're into any kind of history, then this subject is always fascinating.
I think so. And I know Corinne and we can go off for hours talking about different historical things and the links and all that. Same with Jane Harris and I have done it on more than one occasion. So it is. I mean, I love it. But when I saw Anne of Cleves' house, it was a bit of a bash for the poor girl's ego, really. To be told, no, I'm not staying married to you, you're just too ugly.
You're too ugly. Well, yes.
But then at least she came out of it with her head still intact.
She did.
So, it could have been a lot worse. But, well, thank you ever so much for your time, Tim. I do appreciate it. It's been very, very enjoyable, and Guernsey is on my to-do list at some point, as are quite a few other places.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, Penny, look, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug and steal a little bit of airtime from you. I hope that's going to be okay. Right, I'll talk very fast. But there is still places available in April, and I cannot believe this. I think it's more about, this is kind of lead up to Christmas.
Yeah.
This is an incredible location. It's a ghost hunt like, you wouldn't believe, just to experience the vibe from this hospital. There are still places available, and Guernsey is a magnificently beautiful place. If you come in from the mainland, come over. The travel really isn't that dear, and make a weekend of it, and you will have a fantastic time.
I will, maybe not this coming year, because I've already got pretty much all the expensive trips booked for this coming year, but I will definitely contemplate it, and I'll come over with some bandages and stuff and see what I can trigger.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
Well, so that was Tim. That was Tim from Pigs. Wasn't he lovely? So easy to chat to, and I've muted him now, so he's talking in my ear in the background. But yeah, so hopefully Tim will join us again. Well, next year now, because we've only got a couple more weeks left, haven't we? But do check out their Facebook pages, check out their website, and if you are free those days in April, I think it's the 17th and the 18th. Go out there. It really does look amazing, and I've only sort of touched on some of the stuff that I found out research, because I think we could have talked for a good 2 or 3 hours about what happened to Guernsey and how the hospital was used. Next week I have a bit of a coup. I have the wonderful Katrina Weidman on my show, and we're going to be talking about the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, amongst other things. Now, I will say it is a recording, because Miss Katrina it's taken us about 8 months to get the interview recorded. She's that busy, which is always a good sign. But do tune in, and she has said if I have any questions for her, I can email them to her and she will reply back. Well, that's next week. If you miss any of the shows we do on Parasearch, on any of the different shows, feel free to go over to the Spreaker app, and you can click share. No, that's YouTube. You click share and subscribe. But on the Spreaker app, you can always download them and listen to them when you're doing your housework, or put them on your earpods or whatever they're called when you're sitting in the office and no one realises you're having a listen, rather than just listening to everyone talking in the background. But tomorrow night you've got the PSH radio show. I will be back next week, like I said, with an interview with the lovely Katrina Weidman. But until then, my lovelies, have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.